Welcome. In this video, the event, Grani and the Knights' treasure, will be summarized. Throughout the video, there will be spoilers for the story of Arknights. If you don't want to be spoiled, please go and play the game. The event starts from the perspective of a woman who is in pain and quite dehydrated. Two bounty hunters leer over her, with the pair commenting that she still won't break after being left in the sun for a day. Carol, the name of the woman being tortured, supposedly knows where a treasure is, but isn't willing to give it up. Footsteps approach the situation, with a voice saying that even in Casimir's, ruffians are everywhere. Both bounty hunters turn to face the voice to find a Karanta woman carrying a pike. Both tell her to leave before the Karanta attacks. One of the bounty hunters recognizes the Karanta's uniform, saying she isn't from the area. The Karanta is revealed to be Grani, who successfully defeats the bounty hunters and goes to check on Carol, before Carol passes out from exhaustion and dehydration. Later, in a nearby village, bounty hunters are searching for Grani and Carol, but the villagers they interrogate plead ignorance. After the bounty hunters leave, the villagers signal for Grani to come out. The villagers and Grani are working together, as Grani promised that she'd save the village, with a villager announcing that Grani is a knight. Carol is confused by Grani being a woman, and concerned that she may make the villagers pay tribute. Grani reassures Carol, saying that she's neither a knight or from Casimir's. She's just a member of the mounted police, from Victoria. So she's just there to maintain public order and security. Grani is in Casimir's because she received the village's request for aid, and she wanted to see what her parents' homeland was like. Carol is thankful for the aid and curses the Casimirzian government for not sending aid to their little village of Deauville, as they're all the way out in the sticks. For generations, Deauville and its citizens have lived in the mountains. Though they sometimes vacate from catastrophes, it's still their home, and they can't and won't give up their land. But now, the bounty hunters searching for the Knights' treasures reap destruction across the mountains. The village slowly became the stomping grounds for bounty hunters looking to strike it rich, due to the village of Deauville being the only passage north, along with a group of bounty hunters digging up a knight's sarcophagus and small chest filled with gold coins in the mountains. Grani shows a coin and asks if it's the type they're looking for, with Carol confirming that they are. A certain saying began to circulate which further perpetuated Deauville's troubles. Quote, "The ancient knights of Casimir's were all buried with their riches near the lands they once called home. Their souls protected these unmarked graves for all eternity. Only those who fear not sacrifice and possess the truth, dauntless bloodline of Casimir's may open the path." This led them to believe that the villagers knew where the treasure was buried. More bounty hunters appear, and Grani goes out to confront them, as innocent lives will get dragged into this dumb gold rush. The villagers tell Grani to stay safe and take care of their chief. Grani is confused by this, with Carol speaking up and explaining that though she's only been one for 6 months, she's the chief of the village of Deauville. Grani manages to hold off some of the bounty hunters before one runs off and calls for backup. Carol tells Grani of a hiding place, an attic, as the bounty hunters have destroyed the mills, warehouses, and even an electrical room. So realistically, they probably won't look inside the attic. Carol brings up the aid request that brought Grani to the village, with a request actually saying that Carol does have info regarding some treasure. Carol confirms this, with the treasure needing a key that is passed down from one chieftain to the next, and since the bounty hunters have found out about this, they've been threatening the village, destroying farmland, stealing their winter rations, and harassing villagers. Grani understands and says she has a plan to slip past the bounty hunters looking for them. Grani boosts Carol up to the window of the attic to make an escape, with Carol being surprised by someone flying past the window. Outside, the bounty hunters are trying to stop a woman they call a monster, as she's already taken out multiple of them. The woman speaks in Agirian, saying that all that stand before her shall perish. The captain of the bounty hunters asks what she's mumbling about before the bounty huntress sends the captain flying into the river. The huntress switches to either Victorian or Colombian and asks where, quote-unquote, she is, but the bounty hunters don't know what the huntress is talking about. She then single-handedly defeats them all. Grani recognizes the huntress as possibly being her co-worker, possibly in Deauville on another mission. Grani says it's now or never to get out of the village, but Carol wants to talk to the huntress before they leave. As they're exiting their hiding space, they run into the hunters. The hunters tell everyone to be quiet, seemingly not recognizing Grani, as they're hiding from the huntress. The huntress walks away, and then the hunters recognize Grani, demanding she hand over Carol. Grani refuses and prepares to defend against the bounty hunters. As they fight, a stray crossbow bolt nearly misses Carol, when suddenly a large man in ballistic armor throws a flashbang and stuns the hunters. The large man says they need to find somewhere to hide while the hunters are stunned, and Carol leads them to a forest outside the village. After they escape, Grani still has her guard up around the large man. The large man puts down his weapons and reveals that he's a bounty hunter as well, just not as greedy as the others. He's willing to work with Carol to get the info, instead of forcing her. Grani asks about the hunters in Duville, with the large man explaining that there's multiple groups in the village scouring for the treasure, naming the Torrent Troop, Florence Fiends, Lublin League, and Valk Vanguards. It's only a matter of time before someone finds something, and when they do, blood will be spilled, and Duville will likely be wiped off the map. In exchange for being more understanding, the large man, named Big Bob, can put his wilderness survival, hunting, code cracking, trap dismantling, and so on skills to use. Before committing to anything, Grani talks to Carol out of earshot, with Carol saying she can't work with a bounty hunter. She's never seen Big Bob before, but it'd still be risky to trust him. Carol schemes that giving him hints would be better, with Grani saying that her coworker may not be trustworthy either. The two return and tell Bob that they need to get to Mount Terret, but to do so, they need to pass through a combat zone or two. As the three near the foot of Mount Terret, Bob leads the way, telling them to stay in his tracks as a rock nearby was marked by hunters, possibly indicating a trap ahead. Bob guides Grani and Carol around an animal trap, rolling log trap, and spiked pitfall, before coming upon a symbol drawn in blood. The symbol is for a monster, and as the three inspect the symbol, a hunter runs past them, yelling about the monster and the direction they're heading. A moment later, the Aegirian huntress appears, with Grani recognizing her as Scotty. Scotty sees Carol and demands she be handed over to her. Bob remarks that there's something not right about Scotty's eyes as Scotty leaps and attacks Grani, saying that it was a warning. Bob is confused as to why someone Grani knew attacked her before Grani tells everyone to run. The three run from Scotty, who chases and attacks them. Carol also notes how red Scotty's eyes are, and as they run from her, all four run into an ambush. The ambushing bounty hunters fire multiple crossbow bolts at the quartet, with Grani protecting Scotty. The captain of the hunters asks what Grani is doing, with Grani explaining that she doesn't know why Scotty is after them, but she's still her co-worker. The three then make their escape as the hunters and Scotty fight. Grani and Bob manage to fight off most of the hunters that pursued them, with Grani noticing that Bob has a wound on his leg. Bob tells Grani that he can handle the situation, and for Grani to handle the ones who are fleeing. Grani deals with the rest, then goes to help Bob in his wound. Bob insists that he can handle it, but Grani insists. Bob further tries to get Grani to go, asking if she saw the infection crystals on his body. Grani reassures Bob, saying that she's from Rhodes Island and that she was a former mounted police officer. Grani and Bob have Carol step back as Grani tends to Bob. Grani manages to stop the bleeding, with Bob thanking her, saying she's naive, but a good person. The three finally make it to a tunnel in Mount Terret. Bob says that at the other end of the tunnel is Mount Mordecai, which supposedly won't have many hunters. Bob was also expecting Scotty to be a bit stronger than the average person, but it turns out the rumors he heard about her were true. Bob then goes on a tirade about how Rhodes Island is enabling Scotty, how they don't truly care about the infected, and so on. Grani tries to defend Rhodes Island, but there's not much she can say to counter Bob's points. Carol apologizes if she was rude to Bob, as she's never seen an infected person up close before, so she was a bit scared. She also mentions that the treasure is important to the village, but they only need enough to resolve their own problems. Grani says they need to get moving soon, with Bob saying their next stop should be the aforementioned Mount Mordecai, which was supposedly named after a long-dead knight. The three reach the other end of the tunnel to see two reunion fighters beating down on a bounty hunter captain. Bob rushes in to fight them before Grani can stop him. As they fight, Bob tells Grani and Carol to run as he revs his chainsaw and holds the reunion members off. Grani and Carol manage to escape, with Carol explaining that they need to find the second cave on Mount Mordecai, which is halfway up the mountain. Then follow a dark path to the deepest part of the cave where the treasure is hidden. As they continue on, they hear an explosion in the distance, most likely coming from Bob, and move on anyways. Grani and Carol manage to make their way to the cave, with Carol commenting on how loud the shouts from the forest are getting. Grani tells Carol to make her way through the cave by herself while she defends the entrance. Carol at first refuses as she doesn't want Grani to play the hero, but is then convinced by Grani, promising to protect Carol no matter what. The fight draws near the cave entrance, with Grani intervening when the bounty hunters attempt to escape into the cave. But then, Scotty appears and strikes down a bounty hunter, telling everyone to get out of her way, as she's not in the mood to play around. Grani manages to defend against the hunters when a loud slash followed by a rock slide is heard nearby. Scotty comes out from a hole in the cave, apparently able to cut through stone walls. As the bounty hunters flock to the new cave entrance, Scotty approaches Grani and asks where Carol is. Grani refuses to do so unless she's told what's going on. Scotty asks if Grani intends to obstruct the mission she got from Rhodes Island. Grani is confused as she was never told of it, as Scotty swings her greatsword at Grani. Grani tells Scotty to not swing her sword at comrades, with Scotty saying she isn't one, and gives Grani one last chance. Grani further refuses, causing Scotty to knock Grani down. Scotty mocks Grani's strength before Grani saves her and Scotty from an ambush, then vaults over the bounty hunters' heads to meet up with Carol, leaving Scotty alone with the hunters. As Grani navigates the maze-like cave system, she comes across a wall that's been blasted open. A voice from behind comments on how good their acting was, with reunion members appearing alongside them. Said voice is Big Bob. He regales Grani on how he became infected, how he joined Reunion, and how he plans to use the treasure to escape to Columbia, where the infected are treated like people and not scum. Scotty makes her way to where Grani and Bob are, and says that she doesn't care who Bob is, or what he's planning, she'll strike them down regardless, with Bob taking her up on that challenge. Both Scotty and Bob tell Grani to hand Carol over, with Grani refusing both. As they argue, Carol comes in from behind, claiming to have finally found the treasure, before Bob lobs a grenade at Carol. Scotty shields Grani and Carol from the blast, asking why Bob is using non-lethal explosives, with Bob explaining that she owes the two girls a favor, but next time, real ones will be used. Grani comments on how Scotty shielded Carol instead of running off with the treasure, with Scotty explaining that she isn't after the treasure, but an answer that Carol holds. The only reason why she didn't tell Grani earlier is because she didn't want others to get caught up in her mission, due to how personally important it is. Grani and Scotty then gear up to fight against Big Bob. They manage to fend off Bob and the reunion members, with Bob admitting defeat and retreating. Carol apologizes, saying without the treasure, Duville is doomed. Scotty tells Carol to step away from the chest and to give her the very large key, as the moment that Carol unlocks that chest, she'll die. After the key is used, it cuts the hand of the person who used it and drinks a very large amount of blood. If it comes into contact with someone not of Karanta blood, it will break. Grani volunteers herself to open the chest, which needs a large amount of blood as previously mentioned, and despite Carol's protests, does so anyways. A few days later, outside the bounty hunter camp, their captain and his hunters face off against Scotty and Grani. Back in the village, Bob apologizes to Carol and says they're grateful for the decision she made. Scotty and Grani return to the village, where Scotty immediately leaves as she just wants to go home, while Grani says her goodbyes to everyone. Before she leaves, Bob gives her a coin, which Grani is appreciative of. Months later, Bob sends a letter to Mudrock from a manor on the outskirts of Columbia. To summarize, he and his group are doing well, as Grani and Carol allowed them to take the remainder of the treasure, allowing for him and his group to settle down after they repaired Duville. Bob reminds Mudrock that Reunion isn't the only place the infected can turn to. Bob misses Mudrock a lot and hopes to see them in Columbia one day. There are some epilogue stories. The first is Carol giving Grani a letter from Neural, which tells Grani that Scotty set off for Duville without permission and isn't there on a mission, after all the events happened. The second is more interesting and ties in with later events. It starts with Scotty returning to Rhodes Island and talking with Calicut, where Scotty trades the key that was open to use the Duville chest in exchange for information that Cal has on where Spectre's originum nerve agent came from, which Cal agrees to give as long as Scotty follows her every order. Thank you for watching. Please follow my Twitter for updates, and please check out my other Arknights and Azure Lane videos as well. There will be a teaser out tomorrow for next week's character summaries.